thank you, Victor, for your presentation, your very comprehensive presentation. So we will go ahead with the team. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished panelists. Over the past few years, African economies have faced an unprecedented sequence of external shocks. These have included the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, escalating geopolitical tensions, disruption to global supply chain, tighter global financial conditions, and growing uncertainty in commodity markets. Policymakers across the continent have had to operate in an environment of extraordinary complexity. These developments have reinforced an important reality. African economies are more integrated into the global economy than ever before. Decisions in Washington, Frankfurt, Beijing, or in global commodity markets are increasingly transmitted to African economies through exchange rates, capital flows, commodity prices, inflation dynamics, and financial market conditions. The paper informing this session offers particularly important insights. By examining the experiences of Nigeria and South Africa, it shows that global shocks do not affect all African economies in the same way. Rather, the extent and persistence of these shocks depend on structural factors such as exchange rate arrangement, financial market depth, policy credibility, reserve buffers, and institutional capacity. Perhaps most importantly, the study suggests that domestic monetary policy alone may offer only limited insulation against external disturbances. These are the issues we hope to discuss during this session. I am delighted to be joined by an eminent panel of experts and policymakers, and I look forward to a robust and insightful discussion. So I will raise some questions. The first one to Chika. Who is Mr. Chika? Chika, okay. So the question is, the paper suggests that exchange rates have become the primary channel through which global shocks affect African economies. How should African central banks balance exchange rate flexibility with inflation control in the face of persistent external shocks? Chika, you have the floor.
Okay.
For 2 minutes.
I will answer this question with trepidation because there will be no quadrilemma or all these big theories in my own answer. So I believe this is ultimately the question of balance. That's what I believe. Rather than choosing one objective over another. Because I believe that a completely fixed exchange rate may create temporary comfort, but can become extremely expensive to defend, always. On the other hand, I also feel that a completely unmanaged volatility creates uncertainty that discourages investment and then fuels inflation. So businesses do not necessarily demand a permanently strong currency. That's my position. They ask for reasonable, stable, and predictable currency. An importer can plan. I am closer to the street than a lot of people here, so I will talk like that. An importer can plan, an exporter can price, and a manufacturer can budget. A bank can lend, an investor can commit capital. Therefore, I support a flexible exchange rate system, but not an abandoned exchange rate system. The central bank should allow market forces to determine the direction while intervening to prevent disorderly movements that will destroy confidence. Secondly, defending the currency should not rely only on interest rate increases. That's my position. The stronger currency defense, I believe, is actually a productive economy. It's when the economy is productive, that's when it can defend the currency. Therefore, the more we export, the more we process our own raw materials, the more foreign investments will attract, the less pressure we'll place on the exchange rate. In simple terms, the best long-term exchange rate policy is producing more than we consume. Finally, credibility matters enormously. Markets can tolerate difficult news. They dislike surprises. When policy is transparent, consistent, and credible, markets become calmer. And sometimes, confidence itself becomes part of the monetary policy. And that's what has led to the salutary impact and progress we've had in Nigerian currency stabilizing. Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you so much. The second question is to Mr. Tope Kolade Fashua. And the question is, the paper argues that structural factors such as financial market debt and reserve buffers often matter more than the policy rate itself. Should African central banks place greater emphasis on building resilience rather than simply tightening monetary policy?
Thank you very much for the question. So to answer, yes, indeed, there are structural issues with African economies, and the paper has examined just the Nigerian versus the South African economy. The South African economy is a lot more integrated with global markets for historical reasons, more than Nigeria. But Nigeria is also coming up, dominating at least the West Africa, and of course, financial markets are also getting deeper. Now, so of course, economists will argue whether monetary policy rates are the real pressure point, because there seems to be a slightly unorthodox relationship between interest rates and inflation in Nigeria. The policy, the pass-through, is not as direct as you would find in many developed countries. So we run a risk. We run a risk that we may end up slowing down growth or caging growth while we're trying to manage inflation. In which case, Nigeria has maintained a very tight monetary policy stance, interest policy stance in the last few years. And of course, the multilateral bodies, World Bank, IMF, continue to advise us to maintain that very strong stance in order to maintain inflation, to reduce inflation, and to be able to get to the target of single-digit inflation. But the point now becomes we need to ask ourselves some very cogent questions. We are a country run by mainly MSME companies, 39 million of them. The informal sector of Nigeria is the second largest informal sector in Africa after Zimbabwe. And we're talking about 55 to 60% of the economy is informal. how much of that is actually linked with the banking sector and with especially the credit segment of the banking sector. Of recent, we have seen the neobanks and fintechs making incursions into those informal aspects of the economy, but it's still at the level of deposit collection, facilitating banking for them, facilitating payments for them. Nigeria is not a credit economy as much, not even as much as South Africa, where you would still find many people holding credit cards. In Nigeria, very few people and very few banks offer credit cards to people. So this creates a conundrum because the central bank will be afraid to say, you know what, the Monetary Policy Committee, do we reduce interest rate? What if we do and inflation spikes? Who gets the blame, especially from a post-crisis scenario as what we are right now? Okay, so that creates a challenge for us. So yes, whereas we are still going to be keeping an eye on monetary policy rates, but it's a time for us to actually really consider the very structure of our economy and the peculiarities of our economy. We shouldn't be afraid to write our own history in real time. And in real time, okay, this is where our economy is. We had inflation spiking to 34.8% as of December 2024. A lot of that came from, of course, some of the issues in the global market, Russia-Ukraine war, spike in the price of commodity. And that was when we realized that oddly 50% of our importation of wheat came from those two countries. And of course, when that happens, the thing also, there's a correlation indeed between the price of one major food commodity and others. So things like rice, like wheat, they move other prices as well in society. Maybe because people have to substitute, for other products like corn and maize when they can't get the wheat that they require. And so we had that scenario coming up in December 2024 before the rebasing. And of course, we've seen a moderation to 15 point, where we are right now, 16.67, I think. It went down 0.02% in the last, in June. So now the thing is to consider what to do with the economy, to say that, listen, the structure of the economy is still rather, not as sophisticated as what obtains in developed countries or even what we'll see in a country like South Africa. Some of the reasons, and I think I wrote an article on this, why inflation actually went down post-rebasing and was continuing on that downward trend was because of some of the rather unorthodox approaches that was taken in the market to reduce inflation. For example, when delegations would be sent to market unions to tell them not to increase prices, those things have effect in villages, in our little towns across the country. Because again, we had a scenario where sellers of goods can just get to the market and say, this is what I'm selling. And most of what Nigerians spend their money on remains in the seller's market. It is called seller's inflation, piggybacking on the work of Professor Isabella Weber of Boston University. Most Nigerians spend their money on some food, a lot of food, some shelter, maybe they're paying rent, or they're building their houses from the scratch themselves. The mortgage market is still very, very tiny in Nigeria. Okay? Some food, some shelter, a bit of clothing, some socials, the school fees for their children, and their money is gone. In all of those markets, whether the food market or the shelter market, people are complaining about rents increasing now. Okay? Or the school market, education for children, people are price takers. Most Nigerians are price takers. It is what you see, you buy. And so we now have to think about the economy in that regard. Whereas we want to be able to have strong monetary policy and also begin to see how Nigeria can tend towards some of the other economies in the world so that by the time we tinker with MPR, the banks take the cue. If you reduce MPR, banks take a cue and reduce lending rates, which is hardly happens in Nigeria, or at least there'll be a lag. Or maybe for every 1% or for every 2% reduction in MPR in Nigeria, banks will probably reduce their lending rates by 1%.
Can you conclude, please?
Right, so in conclusion, essentially, thank you very much, but in conclusion, there's a need for us to own our economy, to own the structure of our economy, to own the stage at which the economy is right now, in order to make that choice between monetary policy rates and the other ways of tackling inflation in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you. I will call now to Mrs. Ngozi Enis Egbuna for the third question. The findings indicate that food price shocks produce surprisingly little direct inflation pass-through, despite their political and social significance. How should policymakers interpret and respond to this result?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Let me start by thanking the organizers for inviting me back home. This is my home. Central Bank is my home, and I am very comfortable here. Monetary policy is also one of the things that I did before I left the Central Bank. So the paper was very well written, very clear results, no ambiguity whatsoever. So from there, I want to just establish 3 outcomes that stood out for me. One is the fact that there's a difference in the domestic monetary policy multiplier, especially for Nigeria. And it was explained as maybe being a result of the debt of the financial system in Nigeria. And I said, yes, maybe that's true. However, we also want to look at the monetary program that we are using. How do we calibrate the velocity of money? How do we, even if we are doing it well, the velocity of money in the monetary program, have we calibrated it right, especially given the high density and in-depth use of fintech, as well as the fact that money has increased, the velocity of money has increased exponentially since we embraced technology and all that. And then the second thing that struck me was the difference in the inflation variance between Nigeria and South Africa, and that it's a measure of institutional capacity and not monetary program superiority. So that made me a bit more comfortable, because I know how many times we have slaved in the monetary policy department to think of whether our monetary policy framework was working or not. And so it means that it doesn't matter the monetary policy framework that you are using, whether it is inflation targeting or hybrid monetary targeting. The most important thing is that it is not working efficiently for us, because the monetary policy rate is suspect, and then the policy credibility is also an issue, as well as communication of monetary policy. And so I want to shake the ground a little bit by suggesting that we bring out our own African-centric monetary policy framework. What's wrong with having a monetary policy framework that incorporates price stability? Yes. Incorporates financial stability? Yes. But also incorporates things like climate change, incorporate the informality of our economy, because it is very, very huge. And that is why probably monetary policy rates are not hitting the targets. And so that's what I want to suggest, that we can look at an Africa-centric monetary policy framework to see whether that might work better, because the traditional Taylor's rule seems to have fallen apart here. The paper also brought out the fact that monetary policy is not a silver bullet. And so monetary policy has to work with other policies, especially fiscal policy and monetary policy coordination is very, very clear from the output of the paper, from the policies that the paper brought out, that we need to have more coordination, even though that's happening now, but also to include things like climate change policies, to include things like informal sector indicators, to include indicators that would make us more resilient and ready to adapt, because like the Director of Monetary Policy said, global shocks have come to stay, and we should have resilient policies to tackle global shocks, because we are Africans, and we always take the heat of the brunt of the global shocks. So coming to the food segment that I was asked, that is very interesting. And that we have always known in the Monetary Policy Department. Because after all, if you're calculating the inflation rate in Nigeria, food price takes over 60% of the basket. And so it is all over Africa. So we need to have policies that would incorporate both diversification of our economy and also to make sure that we conserve the little foreign exchange that we reserve. What is wrong with having policies that will encourage made in Nigeria or made in Africa goods? Consumption patterns will have to change because mainly inflation and the exchange rate pass-through is a reality. So can we look at how to encourage African-centric goods and services to be consumed in Africa? Not that we will no longer import things, but we will import things that we need. And then finally, to also talk about the food prices in terms of diversification of the economy.
Conclusion,
We have been talking
please.
I will. We've been talking about diversification of the economy even from the time I was in school in the 1980s. So can we now bring out practical policies to make sure that the economy is diversified? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. I will invite now Rose Ngugi for the fourth question. The paper highlights that monetary tightening alone cannot effectively shield economies from global shocks. What complementary fiscal and structural reforms should accompany monetary policy to improve resilience? You have the floor.
Yeah. Hello? Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be in this forum today. I like where the presenter concluded the fact that you cannot just talk about the monetary policy without looking at supporting a monetary policy with broader reforms. And that's where I want to begin and to say that if you look at the paper and the bottom line that comes out is that monetary policy responses actually are defined by the structural systems, the structural factors that are different across the economies. And the first thing that we get from the paper, and which also the presenter was able to bring out, is the aspect of monetary surveillance. I have realized that in Nigeria, it's among the very first countries that is integrating AI into the data management. And I'm bringing this one because you cannot do monetary surveillance without real-time data. And real-time data architecture comes in handy because you are able to track the emerging economic risks, and you are also able to do good forecasting for inflation, and also you can use the technology to also automate the reporting system and therefore look at the screening risk, which means that you are able to embed also financial stability in that kind of reform. So I support the fact that monetary surveillance is critical, and this should come in with investment in real-time data, and therefore embracing new technologies, including the AI. The second thing that also I've noted as far as the Nigerian economy is concerned is that Nigeria is among the very first 3 countries that have embraced the central bank digital currency. And in the literature for the central bank digital currencies, one of the key things that is put forward in supporting the monetary policy is the fact that it tries to enhance financial inclusion as well as lowering transaction costs. And in this case, it helps in strengthening the monetary policy process. This aside, the adoption of central bank digital currency is inhibited by various structural issues, including the fact that if we don't do much as far as the digital technology is concerned, then it becomes very difficult because of access and therefore use of this technology. The third thing that I also want to bring in is the fact that in the financial sector, there are very many players. It's not just the banking sector, which monetary policy focus, or central banks focus on more, but also there are money markets now. Everybody is going to money market funds. There is insurance companies, and also we have pension funds and the like. And I think that you cannot deepen financial market without having collaboration among these other regulators. So I would say that collaboration, or whatever they are called, colleges with all the major players in the financial sector makes a difference in terms of deepening the financial market. And in this case, you'll find that in deepening the financial markets, for example, you'll need to expand the financial instruments. And I like what my colleague here talked about, matters to do with climate change. And I also see that Nigeria and also South Africa, they are at the forefront of bringing in sustainable finance, which focuses on the climate change. And I think this is a way to go in terms of thinking about the banking sector, financial sector, and expanding the financial instruments that are very critical in building up the financial sector. Okay, I'll come back later. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Now, I will invite Mr. Stefan Akaya for the last question. Looking ahead to a world of recurring geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruption, and financial volatility, what should be the defining characteristic of a future-ready African central bank?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the question. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you a lot for inviting me for this stimulating session. For this question, let me answer from a particular position. That's of an open, net importing economy located within a monetary union. If I want to synthesize my response, is to say that preserving fiscal space is therefore the true resilience agenda for African Central Bank. 3 points quickly I want to share with you today. The first point is, over the inflationary cycle of recent years, our union absorbed the global shock, and at approximately 1.5 times. But for the country close to Togo, with a floating exchange rate, this amplified it more than 5 times. The correlation between Togolese inflation and global inflation stands at 0.8. The shock is fully absorbed, but the Togolese inflation remained at 0.4% in 2025, despite the growth of 6.1%. This observation does not advocate for any particular regime. It identifies a function. Where exchange rates cannot absorb losses, absorption must be ensured by other means. That means through pooled reserves strategic stockpiles, and fiscal space. The function remains the same, but instrument changes. The second point I want to share with you is the fact that, which is the most important on my point of view, is the fact that the paper reveals a disparity in financial depth between the two countries. I want to talk about Nigeria and South Africa. Credit to the private sector in Nigeria is 50% of GDP, and in South Africa is 80 to 90%. In our economy in the Union, we fall within this low range. This constraint is not dependent on the exchange rate regime. Togo and Nigeria share this constraint under opposing regime. This is the most direct demonstration that the regime is not the determining variable. An African central bank cannot presuppose its transmission mechanism, it must build it. The ways to do it is, some ways is financial inclusion by using digital, but also to strengthen our integration, strengthen the rules that we have built in the ECOWAS. My last point is regarding the food shocks. The analysis must be precise, definitely. The paper not only finds weak transmission, but also a negative response obtained through an assessment of the terms of trade benefiting the two economies studied. This competition does not exist, but a net importer without corresponding export. In Togo, food represents more than a quarter of the market, and the transmission is very real. When the exchange rate channel is closed, the shock is transmitted through inputs. Further internal research indicates that global fertilizer prices carry an advance signal about a year. So,
could you conclude, please?
Yes. My conclusion is that we should continue to build resilience before the crisis arrives. We should build it before crises occur. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, the floor is to the audience to raise questions, and the presentator, the panelists, after that, will try to answer to the questions. So, the audience, the floor is yours. Okay. The name.
Okay, audience, please, a round of applause for the panelists, what they've done so far. So we'll be using the next few minutes for Q&A. If you want to ask a question, moderator, how many questions do you want to take? We have a large room, we can't answer all the questions, definitely.
So, depending on how many persons are interested in asking questions.
Okay, what we'll do, you raise your hand, introduce yourself briefly and your organization. Perhaps we'll take the first three.
Okay.
First. Okay. The ushers, where are you? Okay.
He is the first one.
So,
Here.
sorry?
Here.
Okay, here first.
Suman Berry from India, formerly with the World Bank and with a think tank in Europe. A very interesting presentation. And really, this may be more for the economists, but this is the economist panel. So the contrast that strikes me between Nigeria and South Africa, which were the two polar cases, are the assumptions that you make about the labor market. So South Africa has an unemployment rate of 34%, and they have opted for a floating exchange rate as inflation targeting would suggest they should. My sense from what the comments, I don't know Nigeria very well, is that you are more like India, which is that you have a very large informal sector, and that therefore you are essentially a classical labor market rather than one with nominal rigidities. So against that somewhat wonkish background, I just wanted to ask whether you believe that responding to supply shocks with monetary policy adjustment, what is the normative conclusion of the paper? I will read it more carefully after this result. But the question, what strikes me is that the labor market characteristics of the two societies are quite different, and perhaps the researchers would like to comment on that. Thank you.
Next.
Okay, can I? Okay, good morning, everyone. Mr. Chair and the panel, thank you for great panel discussion and presentation. Clear report. My name is Umar Njai. I am from Ford Foundation for West Africa. So my question is more about a reflection, looking at how does the monetary policy really coordinate with the various policy and the real economy. So, for instance, it's looking at that we were shocked and surprised by the wheat issue from Ukraine. How does it happen? We do not know our economy. What is really the problem? And also, how can we design the monetary policy when we know that our production, agriculture, and is not really up to the level that we wish? How that the monetary policy and the real production of the economy can be linked? What can be done at that level? Thank you.
Okay. Next.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Friday Ohuche. I'm the Chief Economic Advisor to the state government. From the paper, and I want to say that I read the paper from beginning to end. What came out clearly is that monetary policy framework is not the issue. Exchange rate regime is not the issue. The issue is structural defects. That's what came out clearly from the paper. Now, the question is, when it is structural defects, how do we then address structural defects in a way that it can address the issues that are raised in the shocks? And I take one example, the issue of power. Because we need to understand what is happening in the productivity segments of our economy to be able to begin to model how we can actually respond to shocks in a way that we can insulate the economy from such shocks. South Africa, with their own problem, well, they have their energy issues. But here in Nigeria and many other African countries, how do we sequence our policies that address the things we have found out in the solutions or the papers the research we've conducted? How does governance prioritize solutions that come out of the challenges we've identified? If we don't pay attention to issues that have to do with power, issues that have to do with productivity, now, not even in the manufacturing. Global theory is now moving from producing the manufacturing to producing the services. And these are the issues that can insulate the economy, whether because if it is not monetary framework, if it is not exchange rate framework, it is structural defects. How do we prioritize those things we've found out to be able to support what we're doing in trying to insulate those economies from the shocks? Thank you very much.
Okay, I will invite Mr. Obu to start answers, and then the other panelists.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, participants, for your inspiring questions. In The first question talks about whether it's appropriate to respond to supply side shocks with monetary policy and how far that can go and what the conclusion is. For us in Nigeria, and particularly in the central bank, we have dived deep into, interrogating the critical drivers of inflation along demand side and supply side, perspectives. And what we have found is that both drive inflation. And we've even gone to a level of quantifying by how much, the magnitude of contribution of this. So this put us in a good, position to be able to establish a threshold by how far monetary policy can go so that we don't over-tight. Because again, when you tighten when it is unnecessary, then you have a tightening inertia, so you run that risk. That is on the one hand. On the other hand, the act that establishes the Central Bank of Nigeria provide for advisory services by the bank to the federal government. That helps to now strengthen collaboration between the fiscal and monetary authority. So we try to address some of those critical supply side frictions through coordination, collaboration, with the fiscal authorities so that we identify those areas that contribute to inflation. The second question talk about how we can design monetary policy to interact with the real economy. And I think my previous answer, also addresses that. What we do, is this awareness that no single part of the economy, either fiscal or monetary, should operate in silos. So that handshake is critical. And this is one of such fora that we are able to see what we can do. So in Nigeria, we have various platforms where that interaction takes place. We have a framework that is in place that is trying to define exactly those levels of coordination to be able to see that monetary policy does not unduly impinge on growth. So that is it. The third question talks about, since the issue is not monetary policy framework or exchange rate, the issue is structural, so what do we do? I would like to say that the paper does not completely discount the importance of framework. Framework is still very important. Exchange rate framework, monetary policy framework is important. Implementation, effective implementation of those frameworks are also important. But the conclusion from the paper is that no matter how strong or effective frameworks are, if they are not complemented by strong structural support, then the outcome will not be as expected. That is the conclusion. So those structural issues are directly within the domain of the fiscal authority, but as I said, there is strong coordination between those arms of or tiers of government to ensure that those critical issues are addressed. For instance, we try to, at the Central Bank of Nigeria, we try to dive down to clearly identify critical fiscal structural issues that impede on monetary policy transmission, and then see how we can have a roundtable with the fiscal authority. And that has been very, very productive in recent times. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody between the panelists Mr. Akaya, and then Mr. Atogbe.
Thank you. Quickly, I want to give some insight about those questions. The second question is very interesting for our union because we have a common monetary union. So the monetary policy is common, right? So no country have an impact in the monetary policy because we design it together. So the two remain policies that we have to drive the economy is the budgetary policy and the fiscal, the revenue policies. So what we have remarked during these shocks that we have those several years is when you coordinate very well the budgetary policy, you can arrive to limited the impact in our economy. The fiscal deficit is very important because during 10 years, Togo have a very good fiscal deficit before the shock. Before 2020, we were even positive because the deficit, we were at plus 1%. That's why when the shock comes, we have used this opportunity to face the difficulties around these shocks. So I think what is very important is to continue to be sure that we have a fiscal deficit policy that continue to be sustainable. The second thing that I want to also bring in the discussion, according to the last question, when you want to you don't want to make all the efforts that being a public effort, you should continue to see how you can make the private sector performs. And it's what we have done in Togo, because in Togo, the business climate is something is very important for us, because we know that we have limited opportunity to fuel the economy, so it is only the private sector that can enhance and bring investment in the economy, and so that you can feel some difficulties according to some special issues like power, because we see that the state cannot continue to finance power and make sure that everybody gets access to power. It is the private sector that can do that, and you should have a very good transparency policy according to the private sector. That's the two things I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My response would be, someone said the response to shocks. How do we respond to shocks? And someone also asked about, don't we know our economy enough to have anticipated what happened when Russia and Ukraine? Of course, we know our economy. I mean, every economy has partners in trade. The people we import things from, the people we also export to, every economy. So, but this is the essence of global shocks. That when it happens, of course, we're trying to build the capacity to respond in a kind of economic jiu-jitsu. For those who know how to fight judo, you use your opponent's strength to overcome them, their weight to overcome them. So that's the essence of this gathering here today, to say how can African economies stop being responders to shocks and be able to use those shocks to power up themselves. So if you look back, for Nigeria, since 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, there was a shock. It was positive for Nigeria. And then we went on in the early 80s, there was a crash in commodities. If you look at, of course, let's fast forward to 2007, the Great Recession, the collapse of American financial markets, and of course around the world. And of course recently, COVID-19, and now the geopolitical issues we have. African economies have been responding so far, but the challenge is how do we use those shocks to power ourselves up. Of course, if you ask me, the simple answer that comes to mind now is that Africa must consolidate on its inter-Africa trade. And AFCFTA has been powering up, especially since the new issues around beggar-thy-neighbor policies and tariffs by the US government that they have been levying on different countries in the world. So our challenge is, number one, we consolidate agriculture, we move away from the Malthusian reality, whereby Thomas Malthus had said then that human population will grow faster than the production of food. And he was very wrong, because with technology, food production has been able to grow faster in most other parts of the world apart from Africa. And so we must move away from that. Of course, we are focusing on food security, food sovereignty in Nigeria, where it's a journey, not a destination. AFCFTA also. And of course, recently the World Bank actually said, they brought a policy in March, a paper that said that it is now okay for countries around the world to industrialize. And some people criticize them and say, for 30 years we have told African countries that there's no need for industrialization. But what that says is that we must take the initiative. So, governments will come and go. The management of the economy is the constant. And to be able to, they say, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Are we making progress? Yes. Is it fast enough? Perhaps not. And so, but we know our work is cut out for us as managers of the economy to continue to trade with the world, but to also find opportunities for industrialization, to solve structural problems like the gentleman from Abia State said. Abia is one example in Nigeria that have been able to take some hold of the power issue. What is almost obvious now is that every state must have to take control and solve that problem from the ground up. And of course, some of the states there have been enabled as well, so that we can solve the structural problem before we start to talk about, of course, while the monetary policy people, which is the central bank, will also continue to do the best work that they can. So everything has to move together at the same point in time. But our work is cut out for us. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Just to take the second question and the third question almost simultaneously. For the second question, you asked whether we don't know our economy. Of course, I want to assume that we know our economy, but also to suggest that we have a commodity buffer rule, so that we save up when we are having booms, and so that we can use it when we have shocks like this. On the issue of what we do about structural issues, structural transformation and all that, I would like to suggest that while not overlooking the monetary policy, we should zero in on measuring dynamic liquidity management, measurable dynamic liquidity management in monetary policy by looking at fintech, by looking at cross-border digital payment platforms and all that. And also to suggest that we do real, I know we are doing it now, but we should now drill down further towards shock forecasting and early warning systems. That way central banks should employ things like AI, assisted forecasting, high data frequency forecasting, payment system analytics, and things like that. I think that's the only way to get through some of the structural shocks, but beyond that is to focus on the private sector. Private sector, private sector, private sector. They are the ones that would bring us out of the structural issues and bottlenecks that we have. Thank you.
Rose, yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. Just want to respond on the issue brought out by the Ford Foundation, and I want to look at it from the angle of, practicing a monetary policy that is able to provide incentives for de-risking the informal sector, de-risking the agricultural sector, de-risking also our manufacturing sector. I think that may be able to connect us very well, bring a good link between the monetary policy and the production side. And of course, the two of them would work very hand in hand in terms of ensuring that the monetary policy meets its objective.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, not much to say. I just want to add that the expectation has been that central banks will perform miracles, and including making the rent fall. We know that monetary policy cannot produce food. It can't generate electricity. It cannot build the ports, and it can't repair logistics. It can't secure highways. You cannot manufacture fertilizer, So monetary policy alone cannot solve inflation. It's like asking the goalkeeper to score the goals and still keep a clean sheet. It's not very possible. The entire team must play: government, fiscal authorities, private sector, and so on and so forth. And one thing I will say, if I might, the monetary policy is not successful when economies applaud it. I told you I'm from the streets, really. It's only successful when ordinary businesses can plan and invest and employ people and sleep better at night. And but we have one advantage, big advantage in Africa. We're not burdened by legacy systems to some extent. We can leapfrog what digital payments, mobile banking, fintech, regional trade, young entrepreneurs. If you build resilient institutions, I believe that today's challenges can become tomorrow's competitive advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. The time is over. Then I will conclude. Thank you to the presenter and all the panelists. Thank you, the participants. Today's discussion has reinforced a simple yet powerful message. Global shocks are likely to remain a permanent feature of the policy landscape. While monetary policy remains essential, resilience increasingly depends on stronger institutions, deeper financial markets, credible policy frameworks, adequate reserve buffers, and structural reforms. The challenge before African central banks is therefore not only how to respond to shocks, but also how to build economies that can withstand. Okay. I think it's over.